A Sydney Ugg boot maker, Eddie Oyger, is suing the US footwear giant Deckers in a bid to invalidate the US trademark that prohibits Australian companies from selling Ugg boots overseas. Despite its Australian origin as a generic term, the word Ugg was registered in the US in 1985 and the trademark was later sold to Deckers. But 30 years on, Australian Leather is challenging the trademark in the US District Court. Anne Barker reports.
Eddie Oyger has been making Ugg boots most of his life.
At the age of 11, I got my first pair of Ugg boots.
Today, his company Australian Leather in Western Sydney makes about 50,000 pairs a year. But like all sheepskin boot makers in Australia, Eddie Oyger is banned from using the name Ugg if he sells overseas, because even though the word Ugg is a generic term in Australia, overseas it's a brand name owned by the footwear giant Deckers.
Unfortunately, we have to compete in Australia and we can't export our products out.
Ugg boots have come a long way since they were first hip among Australian surfers in the 1970s. They're now a luxury fashion item sold around the world. Deckers consistently sues any Australian bootmaker that breaches its rights anywhere it owns the trademark.
Apparently, they've got it registered in about 130 countries around the world.
Deckers has already sued 2 Australian Ugg boot makers, and early this year it launched legal action against Australian Leather, alleging it's infringed its rights by selling Ugg boots into the US. But instead of giving in to Deckers, Eddie Oyger has now begun counteraction to sue Deckers. His lawyer, Michael Tessero, says the original Ugg trademarks were based on a falsehood.
And if we can establish that case, then we're going to be seeking an order from the court that they be invalidated.
It was Australian expat Brian Smith who registered the Ugg name in the US in 1985 and later sold it to Deckers. In his application to the US Patent and Trademark Office, he stated the word Ugg had, quote, no significance in the relevant trade or industry. But Brian Smith published an autobiography 2 years ago, which Michael Tessero says proves the falsehood.
He recognised in his book that the word Ugg was a very, very big thing.
Lawyers for Australian Leather have found old surf magazines that prove Ugg was a generic term in 1970, not just in Australia.
The more we can show that people in America were using the word Ugg in a generic sense, the better our case.
Neither Deckers nor Brian Smith have answered questions from the ABC, but Deckers says the word Ugg has never been a generic term anywhere, and the fraud claims have been raised before but lack merit. Eddie Oyger says a win in court could open a huge new market to all Australian Ugg boot makers.
We'll have a market of 350 million people to supply potential customers in the United States.
And he's also seeking a ruling in Australia that Deckers is guilty of deceptive conduct by using the word Australia on its products, even though it's based in California and its boots are clearly made in China.
Anne Barker with that report.